Next morning he woke up late after a troubled sleep that did not refresh him. He awoke feeling bilious, short-tempered and uncharitable, and surveyed his little room with detestation. It was a tiny little cell, about 6 paces long, and it presented a most pitiful aspect with its grimy yellow wallpaper that was everywhere coming off the walls. It was so low-ceilinged that to a person of even slightly above average height it felt claustrophobic, as though one might bang one's head against the plaster at any moment. The furniture was commensurate with its surroundings. There were 3 old chairs, not in very good condition, and in one corner a painted table, on which lay a few books and exercise books. And from the mere fact that they were covered in dust, it could be seen that it was a long time since anyone had touched them. And a big, ungainly sofa, which took up practically the whole of one wall and half the width of the room, had at one time had an upholstering of chintz, but was now in rags, and served as Raskolnikov's bed. He often slept on it as he was, without bothering to undress, without a sheet, covering himself with his old threadbare student's coat, and resting his head on a small, single pillow underneath which he put all the linen he possessed, clean and soiled, to give some extra height. In front of the sofa there was a little table. It would have been hard to go much further to cede or to sink to a low level of personal neglect. But to Raskolnikov, in his present state of mind, this was actually gratifying. He had, in no uncertain terms, withdrawn from everyone, like a tortoise into its shell. And even the face of the maidservant, whose task it was to wait upon him, and who sometimes peeped into his room, irritated him to the point of bile and convulsions. This is often the case with a certain kind of monomaniac, who spends all his time thinking too much about something. It was now 2 weeks since his landlady had stopped supplying him with meals. Yet he would never have dreamed of going down to argue with her, even though he went without his dinner. As a matter of fact, Nastasia, the landlady's cook and only servant, was really somewhat pleased by this attitude on the part of the lodger, and had completely given up tidying and sweeping his quarters, except for the odd occasion, roughly once a week, when she poked her broom into them almost by accident. She it had been who just now had woken him up. "What, are you still sleeping? It's time to get up," she shouted, standing over him. "It's nearly gone 10. I brought you some tea. Do you want it? Or are you just going to waste away to nothing?" The lodger opened his eyes, gave a start, and recognised Nastasia. "What's this? Tea from the landlady?" he asked, slowly and painfully raising himself on the sofa. "You've got to hope." She set before him her own cracked teapot, containing a weak brew of tea made with used leaves, and placed beside it 2 yellow lumps of sugar. "Here, Nastasia, take this, please," he said, fumbling in his pocket — he had been sleeping in his clothes — and pulling from it a small handful of copper change. "Go out and buy me a roll, and get me a bit of sausage at the sausage dealer's, the cheapest they have." "I'll get you a roll in a minute, but won't you have some cabbage soup instead of the sausage? It's good stuff. I made it yesterday. I left something for you yesterday, but you were too late. It's good stuff." When the cabbage soup had been brought in, and he had set to work on it, Nastasia seated herself beside him on the sofa and began to chatter away. She was a country girl, and a very indiscreet one too. "Praskovya Pavlovna says she's going to complain about you to the police," she said. He frowned hard. "To the police? What's bothering her?" "You don't pay your rent, but you don't quit the room. It's easy to see what's bothering her." "The devil, that's all I needed," he muttered, gritting his teeth. "No, this isn't the right time. Not now. She's a fool," he added, loudly. "I'll go and see her today, have a word with her." "Oh, fool she may be, just the same as me, but what's a clever fellow like you doing lying there like a lump, with never a sound or sight of you? You said before you used to go and give lessons to children, but now you don't do anything. Why?" "Oh, but I do something," Raskolnikov said, sternly and reluctantly. "What?" "Oh, work." "What sort of work?" "Thinking," he replied seriously, after a brief silence. Nastasia fairly rolled with laughter. She was a giggly sort of girl, and when anything set her off, she'd laugh inaudibly, shaking and swaying with her whole body till she began to feel sick. "Thought up a lot of money, have you?" she managed to get out at last. "I can't go and give lessons to children what doesn't have any boots. Or in any case, I don't give a spit." "Don't spit in the well, will you? They pay one in coppers for giving lessons to children. What can one do with a few kopecks?" he went on reluctantly, as if he were trying to find answers to his own thoughts. "Oh, so you want all the capital at once, do you?" He gave her a strange look. "Yes, all the capital," he replied firmly, after a slight pause. "Well, take it easy, or you'll end up frightening me. You've made me quite terrified. Do you want me to go and get you that roll or not?" "As you wish." "Oh, I forgot. There was a letter for you yesterday. It came when you weren't here." "A letter? For me? From whom?" "Oh, I don't know. I had to give the postman 3 kopecks out of my own money. Will you give me them back, eh?" "Oh, go and get it, for God's sake, go and get it," Raskolnikov shouted, thoroughly excited. "Lord in heaven!" A moment later the letter made its appearance. It was, as he thought, from his mother, in the province. He actually turned pale as he took it. It was a long time since he had had any letters. Now, however, his heart was wrung by some other, quite different emotion. "Nastasia, in the name of heaven, please go now. Here are your 3 kopecks. Only for God's sake, go." The letter trembled in his hands. He was reluctant to open it in her presence. He wanted to be left alone with this letter. When Nastasia had gone, he quickly brought it to his lips and kissed it. Then for a long time he peered closely at the handwriting of the address, at the dear, familiar, fine and slanting script of his mother, who had once upon a time taught him to read and write. He lingered over it. He even seemed to be afraid of something. At last he broke the seal. The letter was a big, thick one, 2 lots in weight. The 2 large sheets of notepaper were entirely covered in microscopic handwriting. "My dear Rodya," his mother wrote, "it is now more than 2 months since I last spoke to you by letter, and I've suffered on that account. Some nights I haven't even been able to sleep for thinking about it. But I know you won't blame me for this unwished-for silence of mine. You know how I love you. You're the only one we think of, Dunya and I. You're everything to us, all our hopes and aspirations rolled into one. How terrible I felt when I learned that a few months ago you dropped out of university because you couldn't manage to support yourself, and that your lessons and your other means of income had come to a stop. How could I possibly help you when I have only my pension of 120 roubles a year? The 15 roubles I sent you 4 months ago I borrowed, as you yourself know, on the strength of that pension from Afanasy Ivanovitch Vakrushin, a local merchant. He's a good, kind man. He was one of your father's friends. But having given him the right to receive the pension in my stead, I've had to wait until the debt was paid off, and this has only just happened now, so I've not been able to send you anything all this time. But now, thank God, I think I'll be able to send you a bit more. And indeed, in general, we can now actually boast of our good fortune, which is what I'm in such a hurry to tell you about. In the first place, dear Roger, you would have to believe it if I told you that for the past 6 weeks your sister has been living here with me, and that we're not going to be parted ever again. Thank the Lord, her torments are at an end. But I shall tell you it all in sequence, so you'll see what's been going on, and what it is we've been hiding from you until now. When you wrote about 2 months ago, and told me that you had heard from someone that Dunya was putting up with a lot of rudeness in the Svidrigaïlov's household, and asked me for a detailed explanation, what could I have written to you in reply? If I'd given you the whole truth, you'd probably have dropped everything and come to see us, on foot even, if you'd had to, because I know your temperament and feelings, and you would have stood up for your sister. I was in despair myself, but what could I do? At that time, not even I knew the whole truth. The main problem was that when Dunya entered their household last year, in the capacity of governess, she was given no less than 100 roubles in advance, but was told that a certain amount would be deducted from her salary each month, thus making it impossible for her to leave her post without having paid off her debt. This sum, now I can explain everything to you, my precious Roger, she accepted principally in order to be able to send you the 60 roubles you needed so badly at the time, and which you got from us last year. We deceived you then, wrote and told you that it was some of the money Danya had managed to save from her previous job, but that wasn't true. I'm able to tell you the whole truth now because everything has suddenly, by God's will, changed for the better, and I do it also so you will know how much Danya loves you and what a wonderful warm heart she has. Mr. Svidrigailov is indeed rude to her, and he made various impolite suggestions and sneering remarks to her at table. But I don't want to enter into all those distressing details, for they would just upset you for nothing. I mean, it's all over now. To cut a long story short, in spite of the kind and decent treatment she received from Marfa Petrovna, Mr. Svidrigailov's wife, and all the rest of the family, Danya had a very hard time of it, particularly when Mr. Svidrigailov, following an old regimental custom of his, happened to be under the influence of Bacchus. But what do you think turned out to be the case later on? Just imagine. That madcap had long had a hankering after Danya, and had been concealing it beneath a facade of rudeness and contempt towards her. Perhaps he himself was ashamed, and kept falling into a state of horror when he viewed himself, now getting on in years, and the father of a family, possessed of such frivolous hopes, and for that reason could not help acting towards Danya in a hostile manner. It might also have been that his rude behaviour and sneering were an attempt to conceal the truth from others. In the end, however, he could not restrain himself, and dared to make Danya an open and base proposition, holding out various rewards to her, and telling her into the bargain that he would give up everything and move with her to another estate, or possibly even abroad. You can imagine the suffering she went through. To leave her post at once was impossible, not only because of the money she owed, but also because she wished to spare the feelings of Marfa Petrovna, who might have suddenly had suspicions, and she would consequently end up sowing dissension in the family. Why, it would have been a major scandal for Danya too. There would have been no getting out of it. In fact, there were all sorts of reasons why Danya could on no account expect to be able to escape from that dreadful household. Of course, you know Danya. You know how clever she is and what a firm character she has. Danya can put up with all sorts of things, and even in the most extreme situations she's able to find enough generosity of spirit within herself so as not to lose her firmness. She even didn't put it all in her letters in order not to upset me. Yet we frequently wrote to each other to exchange news. The denouement was quite unexpected. Marfa Petrovna chanced to overhear her husband pleading with Danya in the garden, and misinterpreting it all, accused her of the whole thing, supposing that she was the one who was the cause of it all. In the garden there immediately took place a dreadful scene. Marfa Petrovna actually hit Danya, wouldn't listen to a word she had to say, spent a whole hour shouting, and finally gave orders for her to be taken to me in the town in a simple peasant's cart, into which they hurled all her belongings, her linen and her clothes, all any old how, without any bailing or packing. And then it started to pour with rain, and Danya, insulted and disgraced, had to drive in an open cart, sitting beside a muzhik, all 17 versts of the way. Think now, what sort of letter I could have written you in reply to the one I had from you 2 months ago. What could I have put in it? I myself was in despair. I didn't dare write you the truth, because you would have been very unhappy, aggrieved, and indignant. And what could you have done? You'd only have made yourself worse than you already were. In any case, Danya wouldn't allow it. And I couldn't just fill the letter with rubbish about this, that, and the other, when I had such misery in my soul. For all of a month our whole town was rife with rumours concerning this episode, and it came to the point where Danya and I couldn't even go to church for the contemptuous stares and whispers we received. People even talked about us in our presence. As for our friends, they all shunned us, even stopped saying hello to us, and I obtained certain knowledge that the merchants, shop boys, and some office clerks were out to do a beastly thing to us, tar the front entrance of the building where we lived, so that our landlords would give us notice to quit our apartment. At the bottom of all this was Marfa Petrovna, who had succeeded in putting the blame on Danya and blackening her character in every household. She knows everyone in our town, and that month she made visits here practically by the minute. And since she's a bit indiscreet and likes talking about her family matters, and in particular complaining about her husband to all and sundry, which is a really horrible thing to do, within a short space of time she'd not only spread the whole story all over the town, but over the whole district too. I fell ill. But Danya was stronger than I was, and you should have seen the way she bore it all, and yet managed to console me and keep my spirits up at the same time. She's an angel. However, by the mercy of God, our torments were cut short. Mr. Svidrigailov thought the better of it and repented, probably having taken pity on Danya. He presented Marfa Petrovna with the complete and tangible proof of Danya's innocence, in the form of a letter which, before Marfa Petrovna had caught them in the garden together, Danya had been compelled to write and to give to him, in order to put a stop to the personal declarations and secret rendezvous on which he had been insisting, and which, after Danya's departure, had remained in the hands of Miss Svidrigailov. In this letter she rebuked him in the most fiery manner, full of indignation for the infamy of his conduct towards Marfa Petrovna, put him reprovingly in mind of the fact that he was a father and a family man, and that moreover it was vile of him to torment and make even more unhappy a girl whose unhappiness and defencelessness were bad enough. In a word, dear Roger, this letter was written so nobly and movingly that I sobbed as I read it, and even to this day I can't read it without tears. In addition, Danya's good name was cleared by the testimony of the servants, who'd seen and knew far more than Miss Svidrigailov had ever supposed, as is always the case in such situations. Marfa Petrovna was utterly shocked and destroyed anew, as she herself confessed, but was on the other hand entirely convinced of Danya's innocence, and on the next day, on the Sunday, coming straight to the church, went down on her knees and in tears begged the Queen of Heaven to give her the strength to endure this new ordeal and to fulfil her duty. Then, fresh from church, without bothering to look in anywhere else, she came straight to us, told us everything, wept bitterly, and in complete repentance embraced Danya and begged her to forgive her. That same morning, wasting no time, she went straight from us to all the houses in town, and in every one of them, in terms most flattering to Danya, shedding floods of tears, re-established Danya's innocence and the nobility of her emotions and behaviour. Not only that, she showed and read aloud to everyone that letter Danya had written in her own hand to Mr. Svidrigailov, and even allowed people to make copies of it, which I consider is going a bit too far. Thus it was that she had to spend several days going round to everyone in town, as some people began to get offended that others had been shown preference, and thus it was that queues began to form, so that in every house people were waiting for it to be their turn. And everyone knew that on such and such a day Marfa Petrovna would be reading that letter in this house or that house, and present at every reading of it would be even those people who had already heard the letter several times in their own homes and those of their friends. It's my opinion that she went far, far too far. But that's the sort of woman Marfa Petrovna is. At any rate, she completely restored Danya's honour, and the entire vileness of the whole affair has come to rest at the door of her husband, he being the principal culprit, as an indelible disgrace, so that I actually feel sorry for him. And they've dealt with that madcap far too harshly. Danya was immediately invited to go and give lessons in several households, but she refused. In general, everyone started treating her with particular respect. All of this was more than anything else instrumental in bringing about the unexpected circumstances by virtue of which it may be said that our entire fortunes are now changing. I must tell you, dear Roger, that a bachelor has been seeking Danya's hand in marriage, and she's now given her consent. A fact which I hasten to notify you at the earliest possible moment, and although this is something that was done without consulting you, I'm sure you won't bear your sister or myself any grudge, as you will see yourself from the facts of the case that it would have been impossible for us to wait and postpone our decision until we had had your reply. and you yourself couldn't have formed a proper detailed judgment without being here. It happened like this. He's already a lieutenant colonel in the civil service. His name is Peter Petrovich Luzin, and he's a distant relative of Marfa Petrovna, who's had a lot to do with the whole business. It began with him conveying through her his desire to make our acquaintance. We received him in the proper manner, he had coffee with us, and the next day he sent us a letter in which he very politely made his proposal, asking for a swift and definite reply. He's a man of business. He's hard at work, and he's now in a hurry to get to St. Petersburg, so every moment is precious to him. Of course, at first we were very shocked, as it all happened so suddenly and unexpectedly. We both spent the whole of that day weighing the pros and cons and thinking about the matter. He's a trustworthy and well-to-do man, has 2 positions, already has capital of his own. It's true that he's already 45, but he has a very pleasant appearance and may still be attractive to women, and in general he's a very decent and respectable man. Just a bit arrogant and on the gloomy side, but that may just be how he appears at first sight. Now, I warn you, dear Roger, that when you meet him in St. Petersburg, which will be very soon now, you mustn't judge him too quickly and hastily, the way you usually do when you don't like something about somebody at first glance. I say this just in case, as I'm certain he'll make a pleasant impression on you. Indeed, in order to get to know anyone at all, it's necessary to approach them cautiously and by stages, so as not to jump to erroneous conclusions, which may be very hard to correct and make amends for afterwards. And there are many grounds for believing that Pyotr Petrovitch is a highly honourable man. On his first visit to us, he told us that he's a positive man, but that he shares, as he himself put it, the convictions of our most recent generations, and is an enemy to all forms of prejudice. He said a great many other things too, because he's a little vain and is rather fond of making other people listen to him, but, that scarcely amounts to a sin. I didn't understand much of it, of course, but Dunya explained to me that even though he's not a man of great education, he is nonetheless intelligent, and it would appear kind. You know what your sister's like, Roger. She's a steadfast, sensible, patient and magnanimous girl, although she has a fiery heart, something I've come to know very well. Of course, neither on his side nor on hers is there any great love, but Dunya, quite apart from being a clever girl, is at the same time a being as noble as an angel, and she will make it her duty to constitute the happiness of her husband, who in his turn will care about hers. Of this last we have yet has no major reason to doubt, though I must admit the whole thing has happened a bit quickly. What's more, he's a very prudent man, and he naturally sees that his own conjugal bliss will be that bit more secure the happier Dunya is being married to him. And as for a few roughnesses of character, old habits, and even a certain lack of harmony with regard to ideas, something that's impossible to avoid even in the most happy of marriages, on that score Dunya herself has told me that she has faith in herself, that there's no reason to worry, and that she'll be able to put up with a great deal, as long as their future relationship is an honest and fair one. I also found him a bit hard-mannered at first, but it could just be that he's a straightforward sort of man, and I'm sure that's what it is. For example, on his second visit, when he had had Dunya's consent, he said during the course of the conversation that even in the days before he had met Dunya, he had decided to marry an honest girl, but one without a dowry, and she must be the kind of girl who already knew what poverty was like, because, as he explained, a husband must in no way be beholden to his wife, and it's always far better if the wife views the husband as her benefactor. I should add that he put it in terms that were somewhat gentler and more affectionate than the ones I've used. I'm afraid I've forgotten his actual words and remember only the general sense. What's more, he didn't say it in any carefully thought-out sort of way. It was obviously something he blurted out in the heat of conversation. As afterwards he even tried to correct and soften what he had said, but even so it did sound a bit on the harsh side to me, and I said to Dunya later on. But Dunya came back at me with a fair amount of irritation, saying that words aren't deeds, which is of course true. And during the night, before she made up her mind, Dunya suffered from insomnia, and assuming me to be already asleep, got up from her bed and spent the hours walking up and down the room. At last she got down on her knees and prayed fervently in front of the icon. In the morning she told me that she had taken her decision. I've already mentioned that Pyotr Petrovitch is now on his way to St. Petersburg. He has an important case to attend to there, and he wants to open a public lawyer's office in the capital. For a long time now he's been engaged in the pursuance of various actions and lawsuits, and only the other day he actually won an important suit. It is essential for him to go to St. Petersburg now, as he has an important case in the Senate court. So, dear Roger, he may be extremely useful to you in all sorts of ways, and in fact, Danya and I have already come to the conclusion that it would be perfectly possible for you, starting this very day, to begin putting a career together for yourself, and that you could consider your future already marked out. Just think if that were really to be so. That would be such a wonderful thing that we should have to consider it as nothing less than a direct act of charity to us from the Almighty. Danya dreams of nothing else. We've already taken the risk of saying a few words about it to Pyotr Petrovitch. He expressed himself cautiously and said that naturally he won't be able to do without a secretary. It would, of course, make more sense to pay the salary to a relative rather than a stranger, as long as he turns out to have an aptitude for the post. As though in your case there could be any doubt of that. But then he voiced some doubts as to whether your university studies would leave you time to keep office hours with him. And that was as far as the matter went on that occasion. But now Danya can't keep her mind on anything else. For several days now she's simply been in a kind of fever, and she's already dreamed up a whole scheme whereby you'll eventually become Peter Petrovitch's friend and even his partner in his legal business, especially since you're in the faculty of law. I must say, Roger, that I'm completely in agreement with her and share all her hopes and plans, as they seem to be perfectly capable of realization. And in spite of Pyotr Petrovitch's present unwillingness to be pinned down, which stems from the fact he doesn't know you yet, Danya is firmly convinced that she'll achieve it all by the good influence that she'll have on her future husband. And of that there's no dissuading her. Of course, we've been careful not to say anything to Pyotr Petrovitch about any of these long-term dreams of ours, particularly the one about you becoming his partner. He's a positive man, and I think he'd take it rather amiss, as it would all seem to him just a lot of fancies. And by the same lights, neither Danya nor I have yet said so much as a word to him on the subject of our fervent hope that he'll help us to supply you with money while you're still in university. We didn't mention it in the first place because it's something that will come of its own accord later on, and he'll probably offer something of the kind himself without being asked. I'd like to see him refuse Danya that. All the more so because you yourself may be able to become his right-hand man in the office and receive this assistance not as charity but as the salary that you've earned. That's the way Danya wants to arrange it, and I'm in complete agreement. In the second place, we didn't say anything about it because when you meet him now, I particularly want to set you off on an equal footing with him. When Danya spoke of you to him with warm enthusiasm, he replied that in order to be able to judge someone, it's necessary to examine him for oneself, and at close quarters, and that he would reserve the privilege of forming an opinion about you until he had had a chance of getting to know you a bit. Do you know, my precious Roger, I think that for various reasons, which I hasten to add have nothing whatsoever to do with Pyotr Petrovitch, but are just a result of my own personal and possibly even old womanish female whims, I think that I may possibly do better if after the marriage I continue to live on my own, as I do at present, and not together with them. I'm quite certain they'll have the decency and sensitivity to invite me to live with them, and propose that I not be parted from my daughter any more, and that even though he hasn't said anything about it so far, that's just because I'm supposed to take it for granted without being asked. But I shall refuse. Several times in my life I've noticed that mothers-in-law are not much to men's liking. And not only do I not want to be even the least bit of a burden to anyone, I want to be completely independent for as long as I have my own crust of bread to eat and children such as Danya and yourself. If I can, I'll find somewhere to live that's not too far from both, because, Roger, I've been saving the best bit of my letter for the end. Let me tell you, my dear friend, that soon, possibly very soon indeed, we shall all meet again and put our arms round one another, all three of us, not having seen one another for 3 years. It's quite definitely been decided that Dunya and I are to travel to St. Petersburg. Exactly when? I don't know. But at any rate, it will be very, very soon. Even possibly within a week. Everything depends on the instructions we receive from Pyotr Petrovitch, who will let us know as soon as he's had a chance to get his bearings in St. Petersburg, because of certain special considerations. He wants to get the wedding ceremony over with as soon as possible and hold the reception in the days remaining before Shrovetide, or if that should not prove to be possible, as time is so short, then immediately after the Gospodzinki. Oh, with what happiness I shall press you to my heart! Dunya is wild with excitement and joy about the prospect of seeing you again, and she once said in jest that alone made it worth while to marry Pyotr Petrovitch. She's an angel. She isn't writing you anything for the moment, but she's told me to write and say that there are many things she wants to talk about with you, so many things that her hand won't lift to grasp the pen, because one can't write everything in a few lines, and just ends by upsetting oneself. She told me to send you a big hug and kisses without number. But in spite of the fact that we may very soon be meeting face to face, I shall still send you as much money as I can in a few days' time. Now that everyone knows that Dunya is going to marry Pyotr Petrovitch, my credit has suddenly shot up, and I know for a fact that Afanasy Ivanovitch will now let me have as much as 75 roubles on account of my pension. So I may be able to send you 25 or even 30. I would have sent even more, but I'm afraid of how much travel costs may come to, and although Pyotr Petrovitch was so kind as to fund a part of the expenses for our journey to the capital out of his own pocket, and has in fact offered to forward our luggage and big trunk for us, they'll be sent via some friends of his, but even so we still have to keep enough for our arrival in St. Petersburg, where one can't show one's face if one is penniless, not in the early days at least. Actually, however, Dunya and I have already worked it all out exactly, and it seems that in fact the journey itself won't cost very much. Where we live is only 90 versts from the railway, and we've already come to an arrangement with the Mudzik wagon driver we know, just in case. And when we get to the train, Dunya and I will be quite happy to travel third class, so perhaps I'll manage to send you 30 roubles, not 25, in fact. In fact, I'm sure I will. But that's enough. I've covered both sides of 2 whole sheets with writing, and there's no room left for any more. There. You have our whole story. Goodness, what a lot of things to happen at once. And now, my precious Roger, I embrace you until our imminent meeting and send you my maternal blessing. Roger, love Dunya, that sister of yours. Love her as she loves you, and realise that she loves you infinitely, more than she does herself. She's an angel. And you, Roger, you're everything to us. All our hopes and aspirations rolled into one. If only you were happy, we should be, too. So, do you say your prayers, Roger, the way you used to? And do you believe in the mercy of the Creator and our Redeemer? I fear in my heart that you may have been affected by this latest fashion of unbelief. If that's the case, then I pray for you. Remember, my darling, how when you were still only a child, in the days when your father was still alive, you used to babble your prayers on my knees, and how happy we all were then. Goodbye, or rather until we meet. I hug you tight as tight and send you kisses without number. Yours to the tomb, Pulcheria Raskolnikova. For almost the whole time it took him to read the letter, right from its very beginning, Raskolnikov's face was wet with tears. But when he had finished, it was pale and distorted with a nervous twitch, and a nasty, lugubrious, jaundiced smile snaked across his lips. He put his head on his thin, threadbare pillow and thought for a long time. His heart was beating violently, agitated, and his thoughts were violently agitated. At last he began to feel suffocated and claustrophobic in this little yellow room that was more like a cupboard or a trunk. His eyes and his brain craved space. He grabbed his hat and went out, this time without fear of running into anyone on the stairs. He'd forgotten about that. His path lay in the direction of Vasily Island, by way of V Prospect, and he looked as though he were hurrying there on business. He walked, however, in his customary manner, without noticing where he was going, whispering to himself and even talking aloud to himself. something that was a great source of wonder to passers-by. Many of them thought that he was drunk.